terms the child's beginning to learn about it. So you want to be asking your kid, what have you heard and what do you know? And then respond to that. And keep in mind that what you want to communicate is that we're still in the safest country in the world, that your child's safe and that you're safe and that your relationship is safe, because that's where children ultimately get their security.
Based on your past experience, how long does it take, though, before you feel safe? Parents can tell children that you're safe, but even for those of us that are living through this, how long is it going to be before we feel safe?
Well, I think to feel meaningful maybe is the better answer. I'm glad to be here today. I feel a lot safer here because I'm making a contribution. I'm with people I care about. It's a time for people to connect in every way they can, and in particular with their children.
It's probably why we've seen so many people donating blood, too, because people do want to get involved and feel like they can help. Well, thank you very much for joining us today.
Dr. Peter Breggin. Before we return to ABC's coverage of today's events, we want to look at some very telling pictures from New York City.
Well, it was really a picture-perfect, beautiful morning in Manhattan, with commuters heading for the city as usual, and also the city beginning to go about its business.
Then the skyline there changed forever. Between 8:45 and 9:03 this morning, two planes crashed into the towers of the World Trade Center, setting them both ablaze before both collapsed in clouds of dust and ash.
And then a plane that took off from Dulles would soon crash into the Pentagon. And the death toll here in Washington and New York is still unknown, but New York Mayor Giuliani says his sense is that it is a horrendous number of lives lost.
We will be back for a local update at 6 o'clock and then throughout the evening. You can also get the latest information from our website at WJLA.com. But for now, we're going to go back to ABC News coverage and Peter Jennings. Thank you for joining us.
The possibility that someone who did this had some time in a simulator.
There is a high likelihood that if you were going to plan this again over a period of time, a year or two, that you could, if you were the planning organization, find a way to get your pilots that you wanted trained into a simulator someplace in the world. There are a lot of 757 and 767 training, or a lot of it available. And, you know, our people train air crews from all over the world, our people meaning in the United States. We wouldn't necessarily have any clue of what was in their hearts or what they were planning to do if they came in the door from a legitimate carrier or even a private operator of a 757, because there are some private ones out there.
Thank you, John. Is there anything else you need to add? Please go ahead.
Yeah, just one other thing. This is an unusual situation, and one of the little flags in this, Peter, at this early stage is the fact that we're talking about only 757s and 767s. That is the only combination of big airplanes that have what we call a common type rating. In other words, if you're rated in one, you can fly the other. The cockpits are almost identical. And that may be of no consequence here. It may have simply been coincidental, but it also raises a little flag that maybe we are dealing with somebody who planned this on the basis of having trained for this type of airplane.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much indeed, which certainly speaks to the point that any number of analysts of terrorism, somebody said this morning, nobody wants to be described as an expert on terrorism today, as analysts of terrorism and terrorism activity, and who try to monitor it around the world as effectively as they can, have said this was today a very sophisticated operation. We do know now, we believe, that about 100 people are believed to have been killed or injured in today's attack on the Pentagon. And as John McWethy from the Pentagon has said to us on several occasions, there is no guarantee that that is the final number. But currently, the information from the Pentagon is that 100 people are believed to have been killed or injured in today's attack. And you recall that Mayor Giuliani of New York, the closest he has come to giving casualty figures, which he's very understandably reluctant to do, that 2,100 people were injured, 600 taken to hospital, 1,500 walking wounded taken to Liberty State Park, which is on the other side of the Hudson River, actually in New Jersey, where the Statue of Liberty, all this in full view of the Statue of Liberty, and that various hospitals from New York City all the way to Canada are treating people today who have been somehow injured in this. Now, I want to talk to Lynn Scher, who has been following the aircraft all day. That is the American and United Airlines planes involved in these incidents. Lynn?
As you well know, the only video that we've seen of an actual crash was of that second flight. That was the United flight that that crashed into the Second World Trade Tower. What we're going to show you now is some very crude animation of the first flight. That was American Airlines 11. That's the flight from Boston to Los Angeles that went into the First World Trade Tower. What this is animation based on the track of the plane, data coming from the FAA. You're going to hear Walter Cross, the programmer, describing it.
The flight took an immediate hard left turn due south. The speed initially decreased by over 100 miles an hour and then increased to over 500. And then as it approached the New York area, it slowed to all the way down to about 300 knots. So, and then tragically it impacted in the World Trade Center. American 11 was indeed the first flight. We have confirmed that of the two.
And that, again, that was the voice of Walter Cross, the programmer who put that animation together. What that shows you is this flight on its way to Los Angeles headed due west and then made that very sharp turn. Mr. Cross also told us that there was an indication of some air violence right before that left-hand turn, violent changes in airspeed as the plane went off track to head into the World Trade Towers. On that flight, 92 people, not counting the hijacker. And Peter, I've done some very quick calculations. Of course, all of the planes involved in today's incidents were headed to California. 3 of them to Los Angeles, 1 to San Francisco, 2 had left Boston, 1 from Dulles, 1 from Newark Airport. Total number of passengers and crew, 266 people, not, of course, counting the hijackers. Peter?
Thanks very much, Lynn. And the issue of taking off from Boston and Dulles and all headed for California, John Miller raised the issue before of whether or not, there are lots of reasons, and again we'd be speculating, but he makes the point that aircraft taking off from Boston and Dulles outside Washington to go to California would have full loads of fuel on them, thereby creating a far greater explosive potential without having had to have explosives on board and getting them past U.S. security, either at Dulles Airport or at Boston. 266 people on the aircraft alone today who have died in this attack on the United States and on the American people. Now, in our control room, somebody says there is a... Let me go first to Bill Blakemore and then perhaps to Joe Torres of WABC, our affiliate in New York. Bill Blakemore, you there? And I gather you saw number 7 come down.
Yes, I did, Peter. I'm standing right on the West Side Highway. The skyline of the financial district has changed again. Just a few minutes ago, I was talking to some people. I was facing north. I saw shock in their face, heard screams, spun around, and then we just watched the building fall in on itself. I believe we have a little bit of tape here. That's, Peter, it was an astonishing thing because the civilians who were standing around here were all amazed, but things have become so bizarre down here that the hundreds of firemen who were standing around looked at it, felt a bit shocked, but then just said, well, we're going to have even more work to do. Associate producer Lucy Kerrigan had been over near that building just a little bit earlier, and the policeman had told her that they feared the building was going to come down, that they were evacuating people from around it. So that's one little bit of good news, is that there may have been fewer casualties from this latest collapse than there otherwise might have been because they knew of the potential. But it's now still a very hot day here. The search and rescue operation is mounting even larger. There are dozens and dozens of fire trucks backed up on the West Side Highway, police trucks. There are what look like hundreds of volunteers who have showed up, who have been marshaled by the Red Cross, all with masks to avoid breathing in dust, but nobody can go in yet. We're still looking at buildings that are on fire down in the center of the financial district, and it's clearly a great deal of devastation. It's not too strong a word at all. It's going to take a while even to assess how bad it is.
Bill, do you have any idea whether or not other buildings in the immediate area are vulnerable at the moment, whether there's concern about any other building as there was about this additional one after the towers?
Well, from the angle I'm looking at, we can see one other building still on fire, and it seems to be on fire through the length of it. I would estimate that's like about a 30 or 40 story building. The problem for any one of us, of course, is that because of the other buildings down here still standing, which are so tall, you can't get a very clean view of the whole thing from the ground. But there's at least one, and it's clearly going to go on into the night. There's a lot of black smoke pouring out of that building now.
Thank you, Bill. We just stay with this photograph for this graphic for just a second. Well, no, there's number 7 coming down. When you think that part of the component of news coverage around the country every year is the excitement and the fun that people get watching an old building being demolished, and they wire it very carefully for days, and it's a very careful operation in order to make sure that a building comes down safely. I think the last one we saw was when they brought down one of the old casinos in Las Vegas. I mean, this is just stunning to see these things come down inside, in the case of the north and south towers there of the World Trade Center, come down within a couple of hours as a result of the structural damage, weakening that was done when these aircraft hit them. And now number 7, the World Trade Center, which is 47 stories tall. We're talking with the World Trade Center north and south 110 stories tall. An eerie experience to be in them at the best of times. They sway in the wind, and people have long had experiences with them. But those, and as Bill Blakemore said just a moment ago, the landscape of New York City has changed one again. And in this instance, it's not New York City, it's not New Yorkers' cities, it's everybody in the country's city at this moment, because this was an attack on the United States, no question about it. Everybody said it all day, a declaration of war, an act of war against the United States. We've had any number of politicians and commentators, us included, who were reminded that the last time there was an attack like this on the United States was Pearl Harbor, which finally induced the United States to get fully involved in World War II. And we're going to go on all day, and we'll continue throughout the night trying to get some grasp of this. What do we know at the moment? The president is on his way back to Washington, and we're not certain whether he's going to be helicoptered in from Andrews Air Force Base, which is tradition, but the security apparatus is concerned, and so he may come in a motorcade. I can't remember the last time a president went or came from Andrews Air Force Base in a motorcade. Even maybe the last time was Bill Clinton. No, I don't even think Bill Clinton at the end of his inauguration went out. But there's another example. And the president wants to speak to the nation. And Linda Douglas reports from Capitol Hill that the leadership in Congress tonight wants to have. You have who on the telephone? I didn't know that. I did not know that. I apologize. Thank you. First time I've heard about it. Judge Webster?
Peter.
I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know you were on the phone.
No, it's been very interesting, and I'm glad to listen.
Thank you, sir. This is Judge William Webster, the former director of the FBI, on the phone, one of the country, and the CIA as well, as my friend John Miller points out. Judge Webster, maybe you could help us understand many things, but at the outset, when this happened today, does this overwhelm the FBI and drive the CIA into some kind of turmoil at the same time?
When it happened today, is that your question?
Yes, sir.
It seemed to me that they responded quickly. The FBI's emergency operations centers were in place. CIA, of course, is going back to its intelligence and see what they had, what they didn't have. I think what you usually find in a situation like that is grim determination to do a good job. I don't think it's any kind of frustration or frenzy.
And as you have watched these events unfold today, and perhaps even talked to your colleagues, your former colleagues in the FBI and the CIA, what's your appreciation of this as a whole event?
Well, it's an extraordinary event, and it brings home what we've been saying about the change of terrorism in the last 20 years, as it moves from fewer numbers, trying to make a political point, to doing extreme damage. This reached a high level of capacity to do damage in that way, and it needs to be addressed as such. When you think about what has happened today and the tremendous tragedy and calamity, it didn't involve nuclear weapons, it didn't involve biological weapons, it didn't involve equipment, artillery, Scuds, or anything. It involved the ability to steal 4 or 5 airplanes and to send them on a course of destruction. That's within the capacity of non-governmental organizations such as the kind you've been talking about.
And do you believe, Judge Webster, because there's a lot of armchair observation today, and I don't mean to include you in that, a lot of armchair observation from many of us, do you believe that this in any way, shape, or form could have been prepared for, if not prevented?
you'd like to think that you could prepare for every kind of calamity, but you also like to think that we live in a society that we're very proud of in terms of the freedoms we enjoy, and the freedom to travel is one of those. Freedom from violence is another one, to the extent that we can know about it. Knowing is the difficult thing. In my years of experience, terrorism was the most difficult because of the cellular nature of decision-making at the top. Even the people who were in the organization would not know until the last minute what was going to take place. I hope we can develop better means of profiling the kinds of people who could do damage, and I'm not talking about highway racial profiling or anything. I'm talking about looking for people that fit profiles of behavior that would be more helpful.
As I listen to you say that, Judge Webster, I think about Timothy McVeigh. Nobody had Timothy McVeigh down as a profile.
No, they didn't. But if they
in Oklahoma City, and many of the profiles we do seem to be the obvious ones. You pick on a member of a developing nation because the nation is antagonistic, or the group because it's antagonistic to the United States. I mean, is this the most efficient way to do it?
No, I think that was just one of the things that we're trying to say, should we tighten up? It's not clear to me that we don't know enough yet to draw any firm conclusions about whether or not people were able to walk on board those airplanes with weapons that pass through the screening devices. We just don't know yet, and we shouldn't draw conclusions about that. But I think we have to be sure that we have done everything we can to know in advance. Getting there before the bomb goes off is the ultimate objective. And it requires a lot of cooperation now internationally. We have to share information with our friends around the world about movements of people who are believed to be bent on violence. It's a very tough assignment, and it's one in which we can see now we're going to have tighten our belts, because I think, again, when the reports of the casualties is finally released, it's going to be a lot more than anybody expected, and probably will be more, or at least approximate the size. We haven't had anything like it since Pearl Harbor.
Judge Webster, I don't mean to make you the target of criticism today. It's not my intention at all. But as I listen to you talk about we got to tighten our belt and our defenses, it's what we hear after almost every incident of terrorism. And I wonder what you think, as you've listened and watched today, what you think more could be done that the United States hasn't been doing up until now that is humanly possible in a free society.
I think we've been very educated and sophisticated in knowing what we needed to do. The counter-terrorist centers that have been formed to be sure that information is properly recognized and passed along to the people. Those are things that can, in an evolutionary way, can be improved. Human intelligence, of course, is what everyone will call for now, and we should have it. But we shouldn't fool ourselves that it's something we can automatically take off the shelf and put in place in terrorist organizations.
At the time that human intelligence, HUMINT you call it in your trade, was downgraded as part of the national effort against terrorism, were you supportive of it being downgraded?
Actually, that was before I came on board. It seems to me that we've been trying ever since 1978 to improve, or at least 1980, to improve the quality of human intelligence. And in some cases, we were very successful. I recall the ability, the Armenian terrorist incidents in the late 1970s and 80s, we were able to get there and interdict the bombs, one in San Francisco, one in Los Angeles, one with explosives en route to New York, and the other in Canada. We know what we need to do, and in some cases we can do it, but we're dealing with some very, very powerful and sophisticated competition here.
Judge Webster, I'm very grateful you joined us. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, but I have one more question for you. Whenever there's a debate or a discussion about the freedom of Americans and the freedom of movement Americans should enjoy under these circumstances, the director of the FBI is always right there at the center. And there's always a debate, there's always an inclination to think that you and the FBI, you want to make it tougher for Americans to move about because it's easier for you to do your job under those circumstances. What's your message to the American people today about retaining their freedoms in the face of this kind of enemy?
I think the message is that we can't have a pendulum swinging back and forth from repression to anarchy. And I think we've done a pretty good job of finding that center, which Edmund Burke 300 years ago called ordered liberty. Mm-hmm. We need to have liberty, but it has to be one accompanied by order. And professionals are very willing to do their job under court orders and the appropriate procedures. All that they ask is that they not be unduly burdened by restrictions that in times like this get in the way of finding the culprits and bringing them to justice.
Judge Webster, thank you very much for giving us the time. We'd like to hear from you later on, so we're very grateful to you at the moment. Thank you. Two things the judge said,
Thank you,
which...
Peter.
You're welcome, sir. Two things the judge says which just leap off the page, John Miller, to me. Clearly, one is the Edmund Burke quote. When he talks about liberty, it has to be ordered liberty. And the other, in terms of talking about the capacity of the terrorists today, said there were no scuds involved. There was just the capacity to steal 4 planes.
And we had talked earlier about airline security. How do you get a gun on an airplane? Unconfirmed reports from these cellular phone calls that were made to 911 from one of the flights saying that a flight attendant had been stabbed. Perhaps they didn't have a gun. Certainly, the GAO and the General Accounting Office of Congress and the FAA and airline securities consultants have demonstrated over and over again that if you're careful enough and you plan it, you can get a weapon onto a plane. And they've demonstrated exactly how, which I won't describe here for obvious reasons.
Right.
So this is security that's designed to harden the target, the airplane. Certainly, there's no such thing as total security there. And terrorism, I mean, if you look at this most incredible, unprecedented, historic act of terrorism, it still harkens back to what we see in the World Trade Center, Oklahoma City, the embassy bombings. We talk about the level of sophistication in planning, maybe, but the actual act is usually very low tech. A bomb made of fertilizer and fuel oil, things you can look up and buy on the internet, hijacking an airplane, perhaps even with sharpened instruments. Now, the aspect that there may have been people trained to fly these planes, that's a new wrinkle.
That is indeed.
Certainly on conventional hijacking. I can give you an update from the scene as things are developing there. If there can be any good news about a day like today, the collapse of 7 World Trade Center, the building they were so worried about injuring rescue workers, has freed up rescue workers to now go into the area, and they are moving in groups of 20 and 50 as their teams are designated.
So the principal danger to the rescue and recovery teams has been eliminated.
The biggest danger has literally removed itself.
Right.
One of the first teams going in is a team of tow trucks, which is literally going to pull rigs that are fire trucks, police trucks that are buried in rubble out of the way so that they can clear a path and bring in other vehicles. And they've requested a number of dogs. Additionally, 100 doctors...
I'm sorry to keep interrupting.
Sure.
Explain why they want dogs.
They want bloodhounds, cadaver dogs, the kind of dogs that can climb up in the rubble with them and catch the scent of people that they can dig for in such a big pile of rubble.
It is a strange name for a specialty, but there are indeed things called cadaver dogs. Anybody who called it the Condit investigation know that they were used, and et cetera. Go on,
right.
please.
100 doctors, 100 nurses are standing by the main police facility that is now the command post for the NYPD, not police headquarters, but an off-site location further up into Midtown, has them standing by waiting for somewhere to send them. And essentially, this long operation, which will be the longest night for New York's rescue workers, has just begun.
And thank you, John. And Cynthia McFadden, I believe, is now at Chelsea Piers, a large sports entertainment complex on the west side of Manhattan, or at least close to it, which, Cynthia, was described earlier as a makeshift morgue. Is that really what it's going to be?
No, it's not, Peter. What they've decided to do here is make this the triage center. We've been told that all victims now who are taken out of the blast site are going to be taken here first. They'll be tagged before they get here, determine what the severity of their condition is, and then once they arrive here, they'll be treated initially and then sent on to other hospitals. I should also tell you that inside this has been described to me, you can see behind me, ambulances. What you can't see probably is that there are probably 200 or 250 ambulances lined up here on the west side highways, waiting. These are empty ambulances waiting to distribute patients or potential victims all over the tri-state area to hospitals. Peter, Inside, it's been described, we got a look inside earlier. It really looks like a MASH unit. It's 50 operating suites set up, hundreds of doctors and nurses here to treat the wounded. They have been here, standing here for hours now. There are no patients here yet. The latest estimate is that there won't be any people here for several more hours. What we're told is, and I was just listening to John Miller, part of the problem initially was that when the first rescue workers went in, and we've talked to some of them who have, some of the second wave of rescue workers, the first wave of rescue workers who went in were trapped, many of them killed by the second blast. And so when the second workers came out, many of whom are now here, they wouldn't allow anyone back in the area, which is why there aren't any patients here at the moment.
Well, Cynthia, let me just go a little farther with that. You say 250 ambulances standing around waiting to pull people out. You'd be talking about pulling people out of the rubble at this point. The mayor reminded people across the country there are 170 hospitals in New York City, and aside from St. Vincent's, the principal nearest hospital, which lost, among other things, its emergency power, I think, and lost its gas operating facility at the time, wasn't it, John?
That was Beekman Downtown or New York Infirmary that lost its steam power. St. Vincent's then actually had to bear the brunt of this.
And so people have gone directly to hospital. I don't quite understand, Cynthia, the who's going to come to Chelsea Piers until they begin to rescue people, hopefully, from the rubble itself.
Peter, the initial thought, and of course, as you know, we've been to Bellevue today, a couple of other places. There have been hundreds of people at area hospitals, as you note, but they don't believe that anywhere near the full weight of this has yet been uncovered, that there are hundreds and thousands of people who have been injured in this blast, and that's the people that they expect to bring here.
Okay.
St. Vincent's is saturated at this point. They're intending, now whether this happens, but the emergency medical services that's running this medical operation intends to bring no more patients directly to hospitals. They will all be brought here first for medical attention and for triage out to other hospitals.
I have declared a state of emergency in the District of Columbia. I ask your cooperation and full support during this critical period.
America Under Attack, a special report from ABC 7 News.
This has been a day of epic tragedy for the United States. Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Kathleen Matthews.
And I'm Maureen Bunyan. Tonight, there is still no telling how many hundreds or thousands of people have been killed in what is no doubt the worst act of terrorism on American soil. It began just before 9 o'clock this morning in New York City when two planes crashed into the World Trade Center. Around 10 o'clock, another plane hit the Pentagon, killing about 100 people. And a fourth plane crashed in Pennsylvania. ABC 7 News reporter Carol Costello takes a look at the terrible chain of events today.
Barbaric acts of terrorism against America begin at 8:54 this morning. Hijackers commandeer an American Airlines jetliner from Boston to Los Angeles, crashing it into one of the World Trade Center's twin towers. Chaos in Lower Manhattan. Moments later, a second passenger jet, also hijacked, slams into the second twin tower. Thousands believed to be dead from the fiery crashes. 9:40 a.m. The coordinated series of attacks continues. Terror strikes the heart of America's military, its headquarters. American Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 757, en route from Dulles Airport to Los Angeles, crashes into the Pentagon. Dozens of Pentagon workers are rushed to hospitals.
This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the two towers. A huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
9:50 a.m. One of the twin towers collapses.
So I was real lucky. I don't know what happened to the people behind me when that blast occurred.
10 a.m. A United Airlines flight from Newark to San Francisco crashes 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh in western Pennsylvania. A chilling call from a passenger on board to emergency dispatcher saying, "We're being hijacked and the plane is going down." The White House now saying Camp David may have been the target. 10:30 a.m. The second tower collapses in New York. Some American leaders call the attacks an act of war. President Bush, reading to a group of second graders in Florida, tapes a message from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended.
The president's security team takes him into hiding to an Air Force base in Omaha. The U.S. military and aviation authorities go on the highest alert from coast to coast. All air traffic halts until noon tomorrow.
And tonight, United States officials say they do suspect Osama bin Laden in the terrorist attack. So we want to take some live pictures now from Kabul, Afghanistan. Of course, Afghanistan has been accused of harboring terrorist Osama bin Laden. We understand there have been several explosions there. We understand the explosions were caused by missiles. Of course, not necessarily U.S. missiles. We do not know that now, but there have been a number of explosions there. Taliban officials, by the way, came out earlier today and denied any involvement in the terrorist attacks here in the United States. Again, Afghanistan officials, the Taliban, have been accused of sheltering Osama bin Laden, and right now U.S. officials suspect he is responsible for the terrorist attacks here in the United States. Also, we should tell you that another building at the World Trade Center has now collapsed. This happened just a short time ago. This is the number 7 World Trade Center, a much smaller building near the complex. As for President Bush, he is said to be on his way back to Washington. We don't know where he's going to land, and of course, we wouldn't tell you that anyway. One more note, the U.S. financial markets came to a halt today after the 2 crashes at the World Trade Center. All U.S. exchanges and markets will remain closed tomorrow. We're going to hand it back to Kathleen and Maureen. Hopefully you guys will have more information about what's happening in Afghanistan right now.
Thank you so much, Carol. We will try to get more information for you about that situation in Afghanistan. As for President Bush, as Carol told you, he is on his way back to Washington. We are told he's expected to speak to the nation tonight at 9 o'clock. You can see his presidential address right here on ABC 7. Kathleen?
Needless to say, security has been tightened at all U.S. military installations, including the Norfolk Naval Station, which is the largest in the world, and also at the massive ports in Hampton Roads, Virginia, one of the nation's major shipping gateways. Andrews Air Force Base was closed after the attack on the Pentagon. And tonight, rescue crews from Montgomery County and Fairfax County are at the Pentagon as part of that operation. That's where ABC 7 News reporter Jim Clark is live tonight. Jim, bring us up to date on what's been going on there.
Kathleen, as incredible as it may seem, somewhere beyond that gaping hole in the background and the smoking rubble, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld has been meeting with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, discussing options for the President of the United States to unleash America's awesome military power. What is likely to be the world's worst terrorist attack has all the earmarks of a world-class operation headed by someone with big-ticket resources, intelligence, and communications, able to coordinate attacks like this against the world's lone superpower, to orchestrate the hijacking of several jetliners, cross-country flights loaded with fuel, and then crash them into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center and here at the Pentagon, able to do all that without advance warning. Someone like the leading suspect, wealthy Saudi Osama bin Laden, believed responsible for the attack on the USS Cole, among others. President Bush might order multiple strikes on Osama bin Laden's known protectors in Afghanistan, which may be occurring right now. Intelligence intercepts may help him pick other targets in terrorist nations. That is all speculation, but it is very much in the realm of possibility. Meanwhile, we are told that the majority of the dead and wounded here at the Pentagon are Army personnel. Some 35 to 40 naval personnel are still unaccounted for, friends and our neighbors. And by the way, that extraordinary videotape that you saw of the Pentagon moments after the crash here was taken by my longtime pal and buddy, cameraman Mike Fercucci. I was to meet him here this morning, was late in traffic. He arrived before me and passed just in front of the helipad and that crash scene less than a minute before the explosion of the jetliner into the Pentagon. Kathleen, back to you.
Powerful, Jim. Thanks very much. You know, and the Pentagon is more than a building. It's an enduring international symbol of American might. Of course, it's the headquarters for our entire military defense. Virtually a city within a city with nearly 30,000 people, both military and civilian, working on site. Construction on the Mammoth Building began back in 1941, and it sits on 34 acres of land, including a 5-acre center court that covers an area large enough to accommodate 5 Capitol buildings.
At this moment, of course, there is no way to tell how many people were injured or killed in today's attacks. Here in the Washington area, hospitals have been busy treating those who were in the Pentagon at the time. ABC 7 News reporter Dale Solly is live at Virginia Medical Center in Arlington, where many people have been taken. Dale, what's the latest from there tonight?
Well, Maureen, this, as you well know, is the Pentagon's official hospital. And at this hour, in this building behind me, 50 doctors and as many as 100 nurses continue on the highest possible state of alert, and they have all they can handle inside right now. The injuries are varied: burns, cuts, smoke inhalation, and with them, the stunning realization that the unthinkable today became real. 36 Pentagon workers and EMS personnel have been treated here so far. Of that number, 14 have been admitted. 6 at this hour are currently in intensive care. No blood donations are being asked for by this hospital. Those must go through the American Red Cross. The lucky survivors of today's incident at the Pentagon have now gone home, taking with them their bruises and their bandages and their memories of America's day of terror.
There was debris falling down from everywhere, and at that point we began to try and take charge of what was going on and do what we could to do to help anybody else.
And the scene very much the same, I dare say, at other area hospitals as well. A short time ago, we got word that Arlington County, Kathleen and Maureen, has declared a state of emergency. That clears the way for federal help, but also, Maureen, for help to come in from Montgomery County. That's on its way, and help coming from as far away as Virginia Beach as well. But watching those pictures in Jim Clark's report just a second ago, the real fear here is that we all wonder if we've really seen the end of the terrorism that we saw today. Reporting live in Arlington, Dale Solly, ABC 7 News. Maureen, back to you.
Dale, thank you. And because of all the injuries today, the American Red Cross has extended its hours for blood donations at 2 local locations: the Fairfax Donor Center at 2810 Old Lee Highway, Suite 200, and also at the Rockville Donor Center at 11820 Park Lawn Drive. The donor hotlines for the Red Cross are being overloaded. Those numbers are 1-800-GIVE-LIFE and 1-888-BLOOD 88. So please be patient if you're calling those hotlines. Kathleen?
Because of the attacks, there's a heightened state of alert in Washington, D.C. And ABC 7 News reporter Gail Pennybacher is live at the district's Emergency Management Center. And Gail, the mayor's declared a state of emergency. What exactly does that entail?
That entails the fact that the city is in a state of readiness. Kathleen, of course, nothing has happened here, but Mayor Williams wants to be prepared. Within the past few minutes, you can see behind me, a mobile command bus has pulled up here at the Reeves Center. This is basically the nerve center for what is happening in the district. The mayor has been giving updates. This is what he said a little while ago.
Pretty much what I'm saying is, unless you have an emergency, unless you have specific business picking up your children from school, stay off the streets right now. We don't know what's going to happen, what's unfolding. We should be prepared right now.
What happened? And basically, they are looking at this as an hour-by-hour situation, Kathleen and Maureen, determining whether or not D.C. Public Schools will have school tomorrow, whether or not the district government will be operating. They're in close contact with the White House. The mayor's office says they are also in close contact with the Office of Personnel Management to make those determinations, and we, of course, will keep you updated as those developments become apparent to us. Reporting live from Northwest Washington, Gail Pennybacher, ABC 7 News.
Thank you, Gail. Maryland and Virginia have been declared a state of emergency as well. In Maryland, officials closed all but vital state and local offices and clamped down on security statewide. Governor Paris Glendening and top staff evacuated the State House complex and traveled to the Reisterstown headquarters of the Maryland Emergency Management Agency. Governor Glendening said state officials received from the federal agency several days ago a threat list of targeted sites, which included the State House in Annapolis. And in Virginia, Governor Jim Gilmore put 300 Virginia Guard troops on active duty and put the entire Virginia National Guard on heightened alert. Also, in reaction to the attacks today, I-395 had been closed for most of the day, but it's now been reopened in both directions. Several other roads in Northern Virginia are also reopening, including the George Washington Parkway.
It's not just the roads that are shut down. The FAA has grounded all flights across this country until at least noon tomorrow. Here in the Washington area, Dulles Airport is closed indefinitely, as is Reagan National Airport. BWI says it is following the recommendations of the FAA, meaning it will be closed until at least noon tomorrow. No one is allowed into BWI Airport right now unless you are picking up a stranded passenger or your baggage. Of course, a key priority tonight is to find out who was responsible for these attacks today. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is among the many agencies working on this, and ABC 7 News reporter Andrea McCarran has more on that angle of the story. Andrea?
Maureen, the FBI is the lead investigative agency in this case. It is working with a host of other law enforcement and intelligence agencies, including the CIA and the National Security Agency. The FBI has dispatched teams of investigators to each of the crime scenes at the Pentagon in Washington, the World Trade Center in New York, and the crash site in western Pennsylvania. Career investigators describe this horrific act as exquisitely well planned. Law enforcement sources say their strongest suspicion tonight lies with Islamic extremist Osama bin Laden. Sources say 3 weeks ago he made a specific threat to attack American interests in an unprecedented way. Sources also say bin Laden is the only person with the infrastructure and resources they believe capable of doing this. A bin Laden associate was set to be sentenced tomorrow for his role in the 1998 bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Tanzania that killed 213 people. His sentencing was to take place in a federal courthouse in New York City near the World Trade Center. Tonight, the hub of investigative operations is here in Washington at the FBI's Strategic Information Operations Center. It serves as the clearinghouse for all the federal agencies who are working at this hour to solve this case. Sources say it will likely take months to gather evidence.
Thank you, Andrea. And here's a look back at some of the other recent devastating acts of terrorism against this country.